When you turn on the news and Iran is in the headlines, aircraft carriers repositioning, missile warnings, the nuclear deal collapsed again, a new round of sanctions announced, the natural assumption is that you already know how this ends. America has the largest military budget in human history, $886 billion for fiscal year 2024, according to the U.S. Department of Defense. Iran is a nation of 88 million people under 4 decades of economic isolation. The story writes itself. America applies pressure, Iran bleeds, Iran backs down, or something breaks inside Iran. That picture is not wrong, it is just incomplete. And the part it leaves out is the part that will affect people who have no opinion on this conflict at all. Iran does not need to win a military confrontation to inflict serious damage on the global economy. It does not need to fire a single missile at American soil. All Iran needs to do is close one body of water, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. A strip of water most Americans cannot find on a map without help, the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20.6 million barrels of oil pass every single day, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration as of 2023. That is 1/5 of all the oil traded on this planet, moving through a corridor that Iran sits beside on 3 sides. The real question in this conflict is not who has the bigger army. The question, the one that actually matters to your fuel prices, your grocery bill, and the interest rate on everything you owe, is who survives when that water closes. There are 3 mechanisms by which this confrontation damages the world economy. They do not hit everyone equally, and by the time most people understand what is happening, the damage is already priced into their lives. Here is what we are going to work through. First, the geography. Why the Strait of Hormuz is a weapon Iran already possesses, not a capability it has to build. Second, the asymmetry. Why a country with a GDP roughly the size of Portugal can impose genuine costs on the world's largest economy without firing a shot. Third, the cascade, what happens to oil markets, to Asian economies, to the dollar's reserve status, and to the average household's purchasing power if this goes further than a war of words. 20.6 million barrels per day. To put that in physical terms, that is enough oil to fill 1.3 million standard swimming pools every single day, moving through 21 miles of water. By the end of this, you will understand this confrontation more precisely than the vast majority of people watching it unfold. The Persian Gulf is almost entirely enclosed. It has one exit. One. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow channel between Iran to the north and Oman and the UAE to the south. At its narrowest, 21 miles. The commercial shipping lanes within that are 2 miles wide in each direction. Iran's coastline runs along the entire northern edge of this exit. Iranian military installations, missile batteries, and Revolutionary Guard naval bases sit directly overlooking those shipping lanes. This is not a contingency. This is architecture, built over decades, deliberately. When the Islamic Republic was constructed in 1979, the strategists who shaped it understood one fundamental truth. Iran does not need to match American military power globally. Iran only needs to make the cost of confrontation inside that geography high enough that no rational actor would consider it worth paying. That logic has a name. Western strategic planners and Iranian analysts both call it the Mosaic Doctrine. Hold the pieces, hold the geography. And the picture that emerges is deterrence without the need for parity. The historical precedent every student of Persian Gulf strategy returns to is 1973. OPEC's Arab members cut off oil exports to countries supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. The United States was not nearly as dependent on Middle Eastern oil as its allies were. And still, the 1973 oil embargo produced the first genuine peacetime energy crisis in American history. Gasoline lines, rationing, the American economy contracting by 2.5%, according to Bureau of Economic Analysis data from 1974, all from an embargo that lasted 5 months, with no military engagement whatsoever. Iran does not even need to embargo. Iran only needs to credibly threaten the strait. And here is where this analysis needs to stop completely for one moment. Before we get to that country, and we will, the foundation of Iran's actual leverage needs to be understood concretely. In 2019, following the Trump administration's withdrawal from the JCPOA nuclear agreement and the reimposition of maximum pressure sanctions, Iran ran a deliberate and measured escalation campaign. Iranian forces attacked 6 commercial tankers in the Gulf of Oman in May and June of 2019. They seized a British-flagged oil tanker in July. They shot down a U.S. RQ-4A Global Hawk surveillance drone, a $180 million aircraft, in June 2019, citing airspace violation. The oil market responded immediately. Brent crude spiked 4.5% within 24 hours of the first tanker attacks, according to Bloomberg market data from June 2019. Those were pinprick operations, harassment, not closure. General Kenneth McKenzie, then commander of U.S. Central Command, told the Senate Armed Services Committee in March 2021 that Iran has the ability to briefly close the Strait of Hormuz. He did not say they could close it permanently, he said briefly. That word, briefly, is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, because a brief strait closure is not a brief event in the global economy. A 72-hour disruption would move global oil prices by an estimated 30 to 50%, according to modeling from the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, published in 2022. Oil at $150 a barrel. In a world where the U.S. Federal Reserve is already managing persistent inflation, in a world where American household debt hit a record $17.5 trillion as of Q4 2023, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That is the structural foundation, not missiles, not hardware. Geography and the price of everything you buy. Now, that third country. Here is where your wallet enters the story directly. And here is where the third country becomes impossible to ignore. America imports virtually no oil from Iran. Due to sanctions, it imports none. So the assumption is an Iran crisis is someone else's problem. A Japan problem, a South Korea problem, a problem for countries that actually need Gulf oil. That assumption is wrong in a way that is going to require a moment to unpack properly. Oil is not priced by where it comes from. Oil is priced on a global market. When tankers in the Strait of Hormuz are threatened, every barrel of oil on Earth becomes more expensive, including the barrel pumped in Texas, in North Dakota, in Alaska. The United States consumed 20.28 million barrels per day in 2022, according to the U.S. EIA. Of that, roughly 8% came from the Persian Gulf, sharply reduced by the shale revolution. America is, by multiple measures, a net energy producer. But here is the counterintuitive truth. Energy independence in production does not mean energy independence in price. The moment the Strait of Hormuz becomes a crisis zone, American consumers pay the global market rate. There is no domestic exemption. There is only the world price. A $50 per barrel spike translates, according to research from the Dallas Federal Reserve published in October 2023, to an approximate 1.2 percentage point increase in U.S. inflation. In the current environment, where credit card delinquencies rose to 3.2% in Q3 2023, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, that additional pressure is not an abstraction. It is the difference between rate cuts and rate hikes. This also does not hit all Americans equally. Households in the top income quartile, those who hold equities, energy stocks, commodity exposure, often see portfolio gains in an oil crisis. Energy companies profit, royalties increase. For the bottom half of American earners, the half that spends a disproportionate share of income on fuel and food, a 30% oil spike is a direct pay cut. No hedge, no offset. Same paycheck, more expensive gasoline, more expensive groceries. Now, the third country, despite every sanction, every maximum pressure campaign, Iran exported an average of 1.56 million barrels per day in 2023, according to Vortexa Analytics. The customer is China. Beijing has been absorbing Iranian oil at a discount of $10 to $15 per barrel below market price. This keeps Iran's economy functional. It keeps China's energy costs lower than global market rate, and it renders the sanctions architecture significantly less airtight than any American official will publicly acknowledge. Here is the arithmetic that should make every Washington strategist uncomfortable. America's sanctions on Iran have not stopped Iran from selling oil. They have redirected that oil from Western markets to Chinese ones, at a discount that directly benefits China's manufacturing base, China's industrial competitiveness, and China's ability to price its exports lower than American competitors. The sanctions did not strangle Iran's energy revenue. The sanctions handed China a below-market energy subsidy, paid for in effect by the geopolitical pressure American taxpayers fund. That is not a talking point. That is documented trade flow data from multiple independent energy analytics firms. And what it reveals is that the game being played here has three players, not two. America and Iran are the visible contestants. China is watching from a position of structural advantage, paying less for energy than its competitors, while its primary strategic rival, the United States, expends military, diplomatic, and financial capital maintaining a pressure campaign that has redirected Iranian oil directly into Chinese hands. That picture does not appear in most coverage of this confrontation. It should be the headline. Now, I want you to take a deep breath before the next part, because what follows is the scenario that professional risk analysts model privately. And the reason it almost never gets said plainly on camera is exactly the reason you need to hear it. Here is the scenario. Not a war between America and Iran. That framing is too clean. What analysts at the RAND Corporation, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the U.S. Naval War College have consistently modeled since 2019 is a more specific and more plausible event. A sustained Strait of Hormuz disruption lasting not 72 hours, but 2 to 4 weeks. What does that actually look like? Iran's naval doctrine, the combination of fast attack craft, coastal missile batteries, mine-laying capability, and submarine operations, is not designed to sink American aircraft carriers. It is designed to make insuring, routing, and operating commercial tankers through the strait commercially non-viable. Lloyd's of London war risk insurance premiums for tankers transiting the Persian Gulf rose by 400% in the weeks following the 2019 tanker attacks, according to Lloyd's Market Association data from July 2019. Not because tankers were being sunk at scale, because the probability had shifted enough to change the actuarial mathematics. Now extrapolate to a 2 to 4 week disruption. Japan imports 90% of its oil from the Middle East, according to Japan's Agency for Natural Resources and Energy 2023 data. South Korea imports 68%. India imports 44%. Taiwan, the focal point of the other major geopolitical crisis, is almost entirely dependent on Middle Eastern energy. A strait disruption does not primarily threaten the American economy first. It threatens the Asian economic engine first. And then, through the interconnected architecture of global trade and dollar-denominated commodity pricing, it arrives in the American economy within weeks. Rand Corporation analysis from 2021 estimated that a 30-day Strait of Hormuz closure could reduce global GDP by 1.5 to 2.5%. Global GDP in 2023 was approximately $105 trillion, according to World Bank data. That range represents $1.5 to $2.6 trillion in lost economic output in 1 month. For comparison, the 2008 global financial crisis reduced global GDP by 2.1% over the entire year of 2009. Before I continue, something deserves a full stop. Inside every military or economic confrontation in the Persian Gulf are human beings who did not choose to be there. Merchant mariners from the Philippines, from India, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, who crew the majority of the world's commercial tankers and have no connection to any of the political decisions being made about this waterway. In 2019, Iranian actions placed at risk commercial vessels crewed by civilians from a dozen different countries, people earning wages in a dangerous corridor because global trade made their presence necessary. Those are not statistics. Those are real people, and they sit behind every strategic calculation that follows. Now, the gap between what is announced and what is actually happening. The official American position, maintained across multiple administrations, is that maximum pressure, sanctions, naval presence, diplomatic isolation, will change Iranian strategic behavior. The observable record is different. Iran's uranium enrichment level reached 84% purity as of February 2023, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. 1 percentage point below weapons grade. Not because sanctions failed entirely, but because the combination of the 2018 U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA, the 2020 assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, and the sustained economic pressure shifted Iranian strategic calculation from partial compliance to deliberate escalation. The IAEA reported in November 2022 that Iran had removed 27 surveillance cameras from nuclear facilities. The gap between the stated goal, a contained, compliant Iran, and the observable reality, an Iran closer to nuclear capability than at any point in its history, is not a communications problem. It is evidence that the strategic instrument being applied does not match the outcome being sought. The probability of a Strait of Hormuz disruption serious enough to move global oil prices by 20% or more within the next 18 months, analysts at Wood Mackenzie placed that figure at 20 to 25% as of Q1 2024, not certain. But that number has been rising, not falling, with each escalation cycle. Step back from the threat modeling for a moment, because here is what all of this, the geography, the three-player game, the sanctions arithmetic, the nuclear escalation data, actually resolves into when you ask the question we started with. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide. The decisions made inside those 21 miles will determine the price of everything you buy for the next decade. Who actually loses when the oil stops flowing? The honest answer, stripped of the framing most media applies, is not who you were told. Iran loses, yes. Iran has been losing in real and documented ways for 4 decades. The sustained sanctions regime has hollowed out Iran's middle class, isolated its scientific community, and depreciated its currency to levels that have made ordinary daily life genuinely difficult for the 88 million Iranians who bear no personal responsibility for their government's foreign policy. That suffering is real. It is ongoing, but Iran's political leadership, specifically the Revolutionary Guard's institutional structure, has survived every round of maximum pressure applied since 1979. Survived and in specific ways been strengthened by it. External pressure has consistently been used inside Iran to consolidate authority and suppress domestic dissent. The 2022 Mahsa Amini protests, the most significant internal challenge the Islamic Republic had faced in a generation, were ultimately suppressed. The government survived. The leadership's strategic calculus did not fundamentally change. Now, the counter-argument deserves a fair hearing. Serious analysts with real credentials look at everything just laid out and land in a considerably calmer place. Their argument is this: Iran's economy is genuinely fragile in ways that limit its options. The Iranian rial has lost more than 80% of its value against the dollar since 2018, according to IMF data. Youth unemployment exceeded 27% in 2023, according to Iran's own statistical center. And the diplomatic track remains demonstrably available. The original JCPOA of 2015 is direct proof that structured agreements between these parties can produce measurable, verified results. That argument is not without merit. The JCPOA did roll back Iran's nuclear program. Verification mechanisms did function. The path back to negotiation has not been formally closed. The honest picture, stripped of both the panic and the complacency, is this: the America-Iran confrontation is not primarily a military story. It is an economic game theory problem in which both sides have genuine leverage, genuine vulnerabilities, and political systems at home whose incentive structures reward escalation more reliably than they reward compromise. Iran's leadership derives domestic legitimacy from being the nation that defied American power for 45 years. Every round of sanctions is framed internally as confirmation that Iran is being punished for independence, which makes resistance politically valuable. America's political cycle rewards projecting strength and punishes any concession framed as appeasement. The domestic political cost of a negotiated settlement for any administration is structurally higher than the cost of maintaining pressure. Neither system is currently structured to reward the people who would have to make the concessions a durable settlement requires, which means the actual losers are not America and not Iran's leadership. The actual losers are the countries with no vote in this confrontation: Japan, South Korea, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Every developing economy that imports oil it can no longer afford at $150 a barrel. Every household in those countries facing food price inflation because fertilizer production runs on natural gas, which is also priced against the global energy market. The actual loser is the global supply chain that was already fragile before this confrontation existed. Here is what to watch. Specifically, watch Strait of Hormuz maritime insurance premiums. They are the most sensitive real-time indicator of what professional risk analysts actually believe, as opposed to what diplomatic statements announce. Watch China's diplomatic positioning. If Beijing begins active mediation between Tehran and Washington, it signals that China's own economic interests are at genuine risk, which means the situation has moved beyond posturing. And watch the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It stood at approximately 372 million barrels as of January 2024, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, its lowest level since 1983. If the SPR begins moving, the White House has assessed the risk as immediate. What I want you to take from this is not fear. Fear is not useful. What is useful is the map. Because when you understand the geography, the economics, and the actual incentive structures of the people making these decisions, you can see what is building before any headline announces it. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide. The decisions made inside those 21 miles will determine the price of everything you buy for the next decade. That is what needed to be said. Now you know.